This
Let's organize the
conference will
session.
now be recorded.
So yeah, as for this session, what we are going to talk about is I'll start with my introduction, or maybe next, what I can ask you for is like, what is your experience in the technology? Let's say Node.js, what all things you are working on right now, what is the exposure you are working upon, what kind of technology you're dealing with. And then probably we can start up with a small session on Node.js wherein we'll be covering the very basics of what is Node.js, and then probably we can have a very small hands-on upon how Node.js works and a small programs so that you can be comfortable about how we are going to proceed in this particular session. So yep, I'll start with my introduction. Hi, I am Mayank. I'm having a total of 9+ years of experience into IT, industry, and I'm currently working as a developer, and I'm working with different technologies. I'm basically working with the MERN stack, mean stack, which is the entire end-to-end stack comprising of MongoDB, React, Node.js, Express. And along with that, I'm working on other front end and back end technologies like Golang. Then we work upon um, React, Angular technology, Vue.js, Node.js, along with whatever is there on the front end side, which is more of JavaScript, object oriented JavaScript stuff. So yeah, my profile is mostly into the mean stack development, which comprises of all these technologies on the front end and the back end side. So yeah, as a trainer, I'm working since last around 6+ years, and I've been training people in different organizations for mean stack and these individual technologies. So yeah, that's about me. Can you please introduce yourself in terms of what are you working right now, which all technologies you have been exposed to, and how much exposure you have to JavaScript and Node.js for now? Are you completely fresh into it? Are you completely new to the development world, or like are you still working with some other technologies? Like a
Oh,
background of yours in terms of technical stuff.
yeah. So I have like around 3 years of experience working as a full stack .NET developer. My core strengths are like more towards backend side. Like I worked with web APIs, ASP.NET MVC framework, and I have a hands-on experience working on UI technologies, mostly with JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and a little bit of jQuery. uh, and I know little bit basics of Angular, but not very much into it. But mostly I worked on the backend side with .NET and SQL Server. They were like my core areas. And
Okay.
coming to like Node.js, I have never like done any real time. I don't have any real time experience in Node.js, but I know it's like similar to a server side language, like some similar to C sharp. So I thought it would be nice if I get to know this language. It will be adding more like more to my skill set. So it might be useful for my future projects as my client is moving more towards mean stack development. So I just want to learn this course so I can enhance my skills. Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
yeah, and Priya, a small background about your technology, what you're working right now. Priya, are you there? Like the two
Uh,
other
sh-
people who joined, I think.
yeah, but she's like on mute.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, not a problem. Priya, am I audible to you?
So
uh,
yeah, I'm able to hear actually. Is it fine? Huh? Are you
Yeah,
yeah,
able
yeah.
to
yeah.
hear? Oh, okay.
So Priya,
Yeah,
anything
so,
about your background in terms of technology? Like I just need to
yeah,
understand before starting. Yeah.
yeah. The same as Ritikas one, and I have mostly on the I have worked in the basics of .NET and mostly on the back end side with SQL Server and and we have just started working on the JavaScript as well. And Node.js is, yeah, it's quite new to me, and yeah, we're trying to work on that
Okay,
like couple of projects in future. So just wanted to understand the basics.
sure, not a problem. I think we have a third person as well.
No, she's not yet coming. So I'll check. Maybe if she comes, I will let you know in middle.
Not a problem. Okay. So yeah, I think both of you have worked upon, the technologies like ASP.NET MVC, and along with that, I think you have worked with SQL. But over here in Node.js, when we are going to talk about Node.js, it's completely different. So I have also worked for, ASP.NET and MVC for 3 years in my career. That was the start of my career. And how JavaScript works in the background is completely different from any of the other server-side languages. So Node.js is basically a JavaScript-oriented server-side language. So how it operates and how it works, the execution model of JavaScript is completely different. So yeah, being a developer from a ASP.NET side, we need to first understand, in order to start up with Node.js, how this particular Node.js technology has a different execution platform than the ASP.NET. Okay, so that is one major thing that we always discuss. How is ASP.NET executing in the background, which is completely different from how a Node.js applications runs in the background. And apart from that, in this particular session, we are going to talk about MongoDB. So MongoDB, again, you have worked with SQL, which is a database which has all those table structures. And over here, we are going to talk about MongoDB, which is NoSQL, wherein we do not have any structure. You are open to add any, data in any particular format. So the two technologies which will be focused upon this in this particular session would be Node.js and MongoDB, which is completely different from what you have done so far, which is Java and SQL. So yeah, I think Node.js is a very interesting language. I started working with as a ASP.NET developer. I worked on classical ASP, then moved to MVC. But when I moved to the JavaScript world and I started working in these technologies, the complete framework I was able to work out. I was working in an entire main stack application using just a single knowledge of JavaScript. So yeah, learning JavaScript is a very integral part of this particular session. Once we are good with the concepts of JavaScript, once we are good with the new features of JavaScript, Node.js, MongoDB, and the entire front-end stack, which comprises of either Angular or React, you'll be very comfortable working with those stuff. So as the part of this particular session, we'll be focused upon learning and understanding the basic concepts of JavaScript, how JavaScript works, what is the basic execution model, and then I can just walk you through to the course content. But before that, what expectation do you have out of this particular session that you're looking for? Have you gone through the course content?
Uh, yes, we I went through the course content and yeah, it's like more about the first courses like getting started with Node.js is all like introduction, and we have some JavaScript like modern things in JavaScript which I'm little bit aware of, and Node execution model and event based programming. I just have like just little bit knowledge on it, but not in a very detailed level. And
So
the
yep,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
So I
go
can
ahead.
walk you through, and along with that, yeah, as you mentioned, Node is more of a event-based programming. So we have a lot of stuff which is getting done on the basis of events. Every time action is getting done, you're reading files, you are, getting data from a database. There are events which are generated, and we work upon, we react to those events, which is again a very new architecture or a different architecture than what we have in ASP.NET. ASP.NET is more of a, programming wherein you click buttons, you help
Yeah,
things. You're basically enabling your pressing button, you are getting data. Once the data is there, you are just having a very synchronous way of programming. In
Yes.
ASP.NET or Java, we are more oriented towards how to make things work synchronously. But Node.js is an event-based programming, which means we are more focused upon making the stuff work asynchronously, which is a basic outline of how JavaScript works. So yep, we'll get started with Node.js, how to work, install, and get, a sample application on Node.js. We'll just have few small application and we'll run those application on Node.js. We need to learn the modern JavaScript, which is ES6 and the next. So in the market, we have right now ES10, which is also called as ES Next. So we'll be talking about all those features which are there from ES6 to ES Next in order to work out with what is there in the JavaScript world and how it executes. We'll be talking about how internally JavaScript objects are created, what is object-oriented JavaScript. We'll look into the node execution model, which is more of a asynchronous model in which Node.js execute. And then learning about events. One of the integral part of Node.js is how to work with streams. We have a continuous stream of data. I think you have that particular streams in ASP.NET as well. But yeah, we'll just try to understand how that stream is different in Node.js. Again, going further, we'll try to access some of the modules of Node, which is used for file processing, like FS. We'll be looking into a module like process, OS. So there are different modules in Node.js technology. So we'll be giving some focus upon those modules that we have, like FS, OS, process, and we'll see what internally they can help us achieve. Then we'll be starting to create a web application. So let's have a web application which goes and renders a list of employees that you are working. So some dummy application like listing the number of employees you have in your company and performing very basic steps like deleting some employees, adding some employees, and all those stuff. So we'll try to create a web application using entirely server-side architecture. So we won't be putting any React or Angular, any front-end technology into it. But yeah, we'll try to achieve a very small working web application using Node.js. Then we can work out with Node.js in order to create APIs. So we'll have some APIs in the background. We'll have a MongoDB database, which is a NoSQL database. So we'll have some session on MongoDB. We'll try to extract data from a MongoDB and expose that data through a Node server in terms of APIs. We learned something about socket programming. Then we have to learn about how to secure your Node application, how to do authentications, and yeah, that's I think the all over course that we are thinking to cover in terms of Node.js. And if you have something very specific you want to cover apart from this content, definitely we can look for that content as well.
Okay, I have a
So
question
it's
for you,
more like,
Maya.
yeah.
The accessing data with the Node.js through MongoDB. So what concepts you would be teaching over there? Like how do we access data from the application to database? The like you use any framework, any database framework over there? We will be going through that framework, or is it more like an some the connection oriented kind of things?
So see, when you're working with Node.js and NoSQL database, so
Mhm.
definitely we'll be learning about how to create, MongoDB connections, how to extract data from a MongoDB server, how to, have those insert query, update query, and all those stuff up and running. But apart from this MongoDB also offers you a way to create a relational database. So if you
Okay.
want, I can help you out to create a relational database using a MongoDB server. So that is one framework that we have.
Okay.
But MongoDB is more of a NoSQL database. Do not follow a relational database. So we can look either way, whatever you require. I don't understand what you say by learning a framework. So what do you mean by framework when it comes to MongoDB?
Mm, what I meant by framework is like an ORM, object relational mapping. Like for example, in a .NET, if you have to connect a .NET application to SQL Server, we generally use Entity Framework. So
Okay.
Node.js and MongoDB, is there any ORM which connects these two, or any like what's the approach for that?
Um, Again, you're saying we want to have a relational database, is it?
E- yes.
And you want to just map those objects that you attain. So let's say you have a database for employee. So let's say we have a MongoDB database for employee. You just want to map them inside a objects. Again, you want to map a database into a object-based structure, is it?
Yeah.
So yep, definitely. See, when you extract data from MongoDB, it is in form of a JSON objects. Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So whenever you have a JSON object can be converted into a object with a lot of ease.
Mm-hmm.
So we can definitely convert a data, we can extract a data, and then we can have a object mapping for that particular data. I don't know whether you want to use TypeScript into it or not. Do you want to have, so we can have classes, we can map the entire data that we extract from MongoDB server into a class-based architecture.
Okay.
So we can create a classes. So again, just like what we have in the entity model, you have classes to which you map the data. So we can achieve similar stuff using the MongoDB. So we can have some classes, we'll create some classes and we can see how to map the database into those classes. So
Okay.
definitely, yeah, we can look into that object relational mapping. Usually in Node.js and on the JavaScript world, we are dealing more with the JSON objects, and then those JSON objects are getting stored. So yeah, um, if you want that object relational mapping sort of structure, we can create classes. We can see how ES6 classes works, and we can map that particular data over there.
Okay.
Or if you have a specific, some infra that you want to discuss, any particular library, then we can have that library as well. I mean, there are many
Okay.
ways to achieve the same, object relational mapping. So if you have a specific library that you want to focus, we can. Else, we can look for a class-based architecture and map that data by ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, I'll let you know if I have any, like if I when gone through any like a separate frame ORM for Node.js and MongoDB. Yeah, then definitely I'll let you know if we can go through that.
Sure. Because see, each company is following different standards. I mean, you might be working in a company wherein you are following some standards for a specific Node.js application. So yeah, we can look for any standard and any library that you want to add to it. So we have some library, I guess, like SQLize, which is an inbuilt library which will help you map the entire relational database queries that you map, that you make, all the queries that you make, they can be directly mapped to object relational models. So yeah, we can use them, or we can create our own libraries or our own classes. So I
Okay.
just love to do things natively so that you understand how the things work in the background. So the focus of the session would be more on the conceptual part of Node.js from my side for now. And if you want to have some specific libraries, some specific technologies that you want to cover along with that, we can add to it.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, any other questions that you have?
Oh no, I'm good.
I mean, learning Node.js is as simple as learning a JavaScript. You learn the concepts of JavaScript, you apply all those concepts into a Node.js application, and definitely you'll have a better understanding.
Yeah. Well, we are actually coming from a very typical OOPS background where we
Yeah.
have a structural way how we write code. So understanding like Node.js on a server side, it's a challenge for me because
No, I
this.
agree. I am training
Yeah.
people with React. So let's say those people who are working with ASP.NET. So when they move to React or Angular, it is equally difficult, because the only challenge is the way server side works is pretty different from the client side. And
Yes.
JavaScript being a sort of a client side library, so JavaScript has entirely different way to execute. So let it be, people switching from ASP.NET to a front end architecture like React and Angular. Again, they have to learn the similar stuff, which is ASP.NET way of designing and working out with the UI, to a JavaScript way to have those UI up and running. And similar challenges when you move from ASP.NET to .NET. You have to learn how JavaScript is very different from the current execution model that you are working on. Again, from NoSQL, which is SQL Server or Oracle, you have to learn a NoSQL database, a non-relational database. So again, non-relational is a easy win, but then you have to learn into how to get into a non-relational sort of mindset from a relational thought process.
Yeah.
So yeah, not a worry. Um, any questions before we start with this very small demo? I mean,
No.
in the first demo that we have focused, what I can try explaining you is the difference that we have in the execution of .NET versus the execution of a JavaScript node application. So that I can focus right now, and then we can just work out further on a very small application.
Also, do we have the test-driven approach will be covered in this one? Um,
Test-driven development.
yeah, yes, yes.
Okay, so yep, what we can do is towards the end of the session, we can see how to test Node.js and what to test, how to test, and what are the frameworks which are available. So yeah, definitely we can add that to the content that we have.
So that is kind of unit test. Is that what referring?
Yeah,
Okay.
so we can have a unit testing, a session on unit testing, and again test-driven development, how to anticipate what has to be tested for an application and how to work with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So shall we start with the small the demo that we have?
Yes.
So the session that we are going to cover, I don't believe in having a long theoretical sessions. I don't have a lot of PPTs and slides. So the only slides which I have, for Node.js is, I think, a slide which contains 20, you know, 20 slides, a single PPT with a 20 slides. I don't believe in a lot of your theoretical stuff. So what we are going to cover inside Node.js is a very practical approach. We'll be talking about concepts, we'll be talking about the things that we have to cover, and we'll take a practical session for each and every concept. The only theoretical session that we'll have is to understand how Node.js works, how the Node.js working is different from what we have inside ASP.NET, Java, or the other server-side languages. So we'll just try to compare the different approaches in different languages versus what we have in Node.js. So the slide or the theoretical content is just a 20 slides. I don't have more than that in order to explain you the theoretical concepts, and rest whatever we are doing has to be a very practical approach. So creating APIs, working with MongoDB, so that would be all practical sessions rather than focusing on a theoretical presentations which I show every day and ask you to analyze the concept by yourself. So it won't be a very um, presentation oriented session. It would be more of a practical session, and I think a presentation of just 20 slides I have, nothing more than that, for the entire Node.js tutorial. So yeah, I just wanted to focus that. And before we start, yeah, I would just like to present few slides. Again, this is what Node.js is, how it works. And I'll just try to help you compare the Node.js approach versus ASP.NET. And then we'll just write few programs in Node. And we'll have a small web server up and running. So again, let's look for the official, what official definition we have from Node.js about the technology. It's a platform for executing JavaScript based on non-blocking I/O. So let's just divide this application into three parts, the three basic parts, which is it contains non-blocking input output. It is an event-driven model, and it is a scalable network application. We can create fast scalable application. So the two main focus element over here is it is having a non-blocking input output. We need to understand what is a non-blocking input output. This particular non-blocking input output approach is very different in Node.js as compared to what we have in ASP.NET. So ASP.NET is more of a synchronous based application. Over here, when we say non-blocking IO, it's more of a asynchronous approach. And then we have something called event driven model. So we'll be talking about non-blocking IOs and event driven. So yeah, these are the two concepts that we need to understand for Node.js. Coming forward, like let's say, let's talk about any of a traditional web server. Let's talk about ASP.NET. Let's say we have two approaches. You have an ATM, and ATM has got a machine. Over there, you have multiple people waiting for their money to be extracted. So they just want to get their money. So outside an ATM, they are forming a line, and that line is consists over there. In the line, people are waiting for their turn to be there. So I want to extract some money out of an ATM. I'm waiting outside a line. There's a person who's standing in front of me. Once he's done with his work, I'll get a chance to extract money, and then the person who's behind me will come up after me. So you have to queue up in order to extract some resource. Okay, so that's what what we have in ASP.NET. ASP.NET is an application wherein you have a server. That particular server, every request gets piled up. Let's say the request that you make has got some synchronous as well as a asynchronous work. Let's say you go to a restaurant. Over there you have a waiter and you have a chef. A waiter is there to take up your orders. So that's a sort of a web server who is capable of taking some input request. So let's say you go to a restaurant where you don't have a waiter, you are directly interacting with a chef. So in that case, a single person go over there, he asks chef in order to prepare some food for him. So what chef would do is he'll take up your order and he'll start preparing. So let's say he take 10 minutes in order to prepare for your order. Meanwhile, the person who came next to you has to wait for that 10 minutes while the chef is preparing food. So the chef is busy with certain tasks, so he has to wait until that chef is available to take up next order. Maybe he'll take up the next order, he'll start preparing food. The person who's next to the person has to wait for certain amount of time. In that way you are wasting a lot of time, so the people who are waiting, they might get annoyed. They'll say, okay, we are not getting the chance, the chef is taking 10 minutes, we have 20 people in front of us, and that's a problematic situation because we don't want to end up having a lot of time wastage. We don't want to waste that much amount of time. So this I can compare with the traditional ASP.NET. Let's say you are working with the ASP.NET application, and your application come up with a request from a user. The user says, I want to, let's talk about LinkedIn. User says, I want to get my profile data. And the data that you want to extract contains multiple stuff. The data could be getting the personal information, getting the data about what are your connections, getting the data about what all are your posts by the friends and your connections. So you want to extract the posts that you have, you want to extract out the personal details, you want to extract out the connection details. So all of these particular data might be stored into different databases. Okay, are you able to connect to it? So I'm trying to tell you how Node.js versus ASP.NET. So ASP.NET is just like a chef who's taking the order directly, and once the order is getting done or prepared, or the food is getting prepared, he is available to take up next request. So let me relate to this to ASP.NET. If you're working with the server and you want to extract some data, let's say you are working on a website called LinkedIn, and LinkedIn want to you go and you write www.linkedin.com. You want to get your profile, your connections, and the post from your connections. So these three requests, the data for these three requests might be there on different servers. So I can move next. So we can say the data that is there for the connections is there on a different let's say on a different server. The data which is there on for your personal details is there in some other database, or the data that is there for the post, the current post is there in a separate database. So you'll go in a very synchronous manner. You'll say, okay, first get me the data, the personal profile. I want to extract out my data. So there would be a network request, there would be a call to a database server. Whenever there is some API calls or whenever you are interacting to a database, there is a delay, because Node.js moves from a JS domain to a web server domain or a network domain or a file system domain. So let's say if you're querying a file system, if you're querying a database, it always have some time associated with it. It's a synchronous query wherein you have to wait for data to be extracted from a database. So extracting database or referring to a file system or making an API call are time consuming tasks. So what happens is your main thread receives a request to get you your LinkedIn profile. It goes to the first database, it makes a query, okay, get me the profile about the user whose ID is XYZ. Then the database takes some time in order to fetch that detail and come out with the output. So he says, okay, this is a profile of Ritika, this is her name, her current company, and so on. Once you have extracted out your profile detail, it goes to the next server. It asks the database, okay, get me the details of the profile or the connections which is associated with a particular person. Then there would be another database call. Again, this database call is a synchronous task, which is a time consuming. Then your main thread is again waiting for that particular data to be available. Then it goes further, looks for the current post. Again, that is the time consuming task. Once all these three tasks are done, let's say each of the database call takes a latency of 1 second. Then you have the first page getting rendered after a time delay of at least 3 seconds, because you're waiting for the database. you know you're waiting for database, you're making three calls to the database. Every time you have to wait for the output before proceeding further. So it's a more of a synchronous stuff that goes in the background. You have to cater to the user end to end, which means you start up with a request and the response is the entire website in itself. And your main thread, which is catering to your request, has to wait every time till the data is not available from the database. So database query is a time consuming task. Your main thread has to wait for that particular time consuming task in order to proceed further. The second query to the database, let's say the second query won't be done until and unless the first query has been satisfied. Do you agree? Are you able to relate what happens being a ASP.NET developer? So let's say if you're making three database calls, first one would be catered. Once the first one has been catered, you go to the second one. Then the second one would be catered. Then you go to the third one. Maybe getting the data requires a lot of a time lag. That database also has a certain query time. You have to wait every time for that particular time frame. Agree?
Yes.
Like, are you comfortable? Are you able to relate to it, Priya and Ritika? Yeah.
Yes, I'm able to relate it to the real-time examples.
So ASP.NET, you start with getting data from one database. Then once the data is available, you say, okay, get me the request for the second data. Then get me the data from the third server. And this is all synchronous. You go one by one. And once all the data has been available from the three databases, then at that moment of time, you cater to your response. You say, okay, I have got the data. All this data has been extracted. Now this is a response out of a ASP.NET server or a request. The most time consuming problem over here is you are making your main thread wait for the database to be, for the database query to be extracted. So let's say so these database calls are, let's say, taking 1 second. So you started a request over there, you waited for 1 second to get database from DB1, let's say a table 1. Then once the data was available, you went to table 2, then you went to table 3. So at least the time frame that you required in order to cater to your request and response was 3 plus second. Okay, so this is a traditional web server approach like ASP and .NET. They do stuff synchronously. They move to different type of requests. So let's say you have to get data, then you have to extract data from a file system. Again, a file system, when you are querying a data from a file system, it requires some time. When you have to go from a Node.js, a Java application to a file system, extract a file details, then get back with the output. So this is a time consuming task, or what we call as a asynchronous task, a task which takes time. An ASP.NET server, when it goes to your system's file basis, it takes a delay, and you make your thread undergo that particular delay. So you can't proceed with the next request until and unless the first delay has been satisfied. So let's say in this particular approach where you had to query 3 different tables, you ended up wasting 3 plus seconds. Agree? So this is
Yes.
a traditional approach that we have in any ASP.NET and a Java server. Priya, are you comfortable with the discussion? I mean, uh, once we go forward with the session, I want it to be very interactive so that I can understand whether you're learning stuff or not. Is the things comfortable? Are you able to relate to it? The more interactive we are, the more learning opportunities that we have.
Yeah, we are connected. Yeah, we are good.
Yeah. But what happens, I'll just explain very quickly what happens with Node.js. Node.js is just like a coffee shop. Rather than, a chef taking up your request, you have a waiter and a chef in the background. So you have multiple chefs in the background. What happens is a waiter who's there on the, main desk, he'll take up your request. He'll ask someone in the background, which is a chef over there or someone preparing the coffee, someone who's dedicatedly preparing a coffee. He'll ask that guy to get a coffee for you. Meanwhile, it will go further and it will start asking the other people about the request they have, which means, let's say you have a single query, you have a single requirement of getting data from 3 different servers. So you want to query 3 different tables. So what would happen is, I'll just get inside a paint. So let's say over here you have a single request. This is a request that you have, a incoming request. So we'll just say this is a request that is incoming. This particular request goes to first database or the first database table, which takes a time delay of 1 second. Until and unless the data is not available, it waits for that particular 1 second, the data to be available. Once the data is there from the first table, it goes further. It makes a query to the second table. Then let's say this table again takes 1 second to extract the data. And then once the data is available from this particular query, you go further, extract the data from the third database, and then finally you have a response. So this is what we do in a ASP.NET server if we are not working out with multi-threaded approach. I mean, very few people work with multi-threading if you are working with ASP.NET, but this is usually what happens. So this is 1 second delay. Now this was how we work with ASP.NET. Now I'll just explain the second part, which is how Node.js would work in this particular scenario. So what Node.js would do is it will get to a database, which is, let's say you have an incoming request. So you have a request from a user to get your LinkedIn profile. This request has got multiple database queries. So this particular query will go to a single thread. So this is a particular person who's executing your request. So he's an executor, a single thread or a executor of your program. So what would happen is this request will go to an executor. Executor will start executing your program. So it will go line by line. He'll say, okay, there's a request for a particular database to extract certain profile details first. So it will make a request to a background thread. So there might be many background threads over here. So it will say, okay, I dedicate the task of getting the data from this particular table 1 to a thread 1 in the background. So this particular one person over here is T1, or let's say a chef who's waiting for, you know, getting your order fulfilled. So he's the actual guy who's preparing a coffee or who's preparing a food for you. So this executor will look for your program. As soon as it finds that a database query has to be made, which is a time consuming task, it will ask T1 to get that work done. Meanwhile, the database T1 is engaged with the database to get the data out of it, which is a time consuming task. So your executor will go further and it will find that, okay, there is a requirement to execute this particular database table 2 as well and extract data out of it. So it will make another request to T2 saying, okay, I have another request for a database query. You go and fulfill it. So meanwhile, this particular thread was fetching the data. It went further with the code. It looked for any other asynchronous call or a time consuming call. It asked T2 to get it fulfilled. Then again, it is a time consuming task. T2 is catering to it. Then meanwhile, it will go through your program and it will do a request to T3 saying, okay, I have another database call, you cater it. After 1 second, this T1 will get back with a response. Meanwhile, this is all synchronous. So you just found a asynchronous request, you dedicated someone to work upon it. So meanwhile, T2 and T3 will also respond back. So this is the architecture which is happening. What would happen now is this particular synchronous execution took 1 second. So this started executing. Within seconds, we were able to find out that there is an asynchronous request. It went to T1. T1 took, let's say, 1 second to execute. Meanwhile, it took millisecond to move to the second request. Let's say it took 0.05 millisecond to further run your program. It saw another request, asynchronous request, which went to T2. It took 1 second. Then another 0.5 milliseconds, this 0.05 millisecond was spent to move to the next line of code, and this T3 was now executing the third request. So all of this T1, T2, T3 are executing together in a parallel mode. So once you get the output from here, from all these T1, T2, T3, you respond back. That response could be over here once you have all the data extracted. So you end up spending 1 plus 0.05 plus 0.05, which is total of 1.10 second in order to cater the entire stack. I'm not getting into very, a lot of depth, but what would happen is as soon as you see a asynchronous query, you dedicate someone. So as soon as a person come up, okay, he want a coffee, he want a cappuccino, you'll ask someone to prepare the coffee in the background. He'll go off the queue. Someone will come in. He'll say, okay, I require this particular coffee. You'll say, okay, you prepare this coffee. And then as soon as the third one comes, he'll say, okay, T3, you prepare the coffee for him. All of them will take 1 second. So maybe they are executing in parallel. So after 1 second and few more millisecond, I'll have my request catered. All of the 3 people will get their coffees in a parallel mode with a very few millisecond delay. So at the end, the effective waiting time is not 3 seconds, it's about 1 point certain more seconds. So this is how Node.js execute in the background. This is how your ASP traditional web applications were working. They were synchronous, but over here we have a asynchronous requests, which means anything that has to do with the time consuming task, they'll be catered in the background.
Mayank, I have a question.
Yeah.
So is it like a developer's responsibility to, when the asynchronous task is being handed to the server, from there the process is getting synchronized? So is it a developer's task to handle all those functionalities, like when it should
So
be in synchronized?
that is the beauty of Node.js. Had it
Okay.
been a ASP.NET, then you have to create multiple threads by yourself. You need to have a master, you need to have a child, you have to fork your processes, you have to make 3 individual asynchronous tasks dedicated to different servers or different threads. Agree? So had it been
Yeah.
ASP.NET, you have to do all this stuff by yourself. Okay.
Yes.
But when we are working on Node.js, this is more like this Node.js server is taking care of all this stuff by itself.
Okay.
Okay, so I can quickly walk you through a program. So right now it was just a theoretical aspect. I can just show you in a practical way in order to how to work out with this particular stuff. But any questions before that? So I can show you both asynchronous and synchronous way of working with the application. Any questions? Are you able to relate to it? First of all, yeah, it's just a demo session. I'm not getting into the depth. Maybe once we start with the session, we'll get in more depth, how the things are getting done in the background, how is the event-based model working. But it's just an overview of how ASP.NET works versus what we have in Node.js. What is the difference between a synchronous way of programming and an asynchronous way of programming? Any questions on that? I mean, be very vocal, if you're not able to
Um,
understand any concept or if you are not able to relate, we can just talk about it.
no, no, we are following.
Anyone, anything? Priya, any questions you have? So I can quickly make you, understand this fact again. I can make you understand what is asynchronous and synchronous programming with the help of a small function. So we'll work out with a small module, which is called a file system module. So this is a very small Node.js program. And I won't explain you the details right now how it works, but yeah, let me work out with a very small implementation of a file system. Let's say I have 3 different text file and I want to extract out the data from those text files. So what we'll do is we have a module called file system module, which is dedicated like .fs. So these are the modules through which you can get some functionality done. So first of all, we'll see how to synchronously. So you have 3 files over here. Let's create 3 files. So I'll just delete this and we'll create 3 file, which is text1.txt, and let's create 2 files in that case, and text2.txt. So let's say hello one. This is text in first file and hello two. So yeah, I'm just writing out the code. So we have to deal with the file system, and what I would say over here is from the file system I want to read some files synchronously. So I'll say read file in a synchronous manner. So read file in a very asynchronous manner. So which file I want to read? I just want to read the particular file, which is text1.txt. So this is a file which I want to read. I want to extract the data inside a variable, which is txt data. So if you're not able to relate to the syntax, it's fine. I just want to show you what happens in synchronous programming versus asynchronous programming. So what we'll do is we'll just copy this particular line. We'll say we want to read another text file, which is text file 2. And we want to, rather than just reading the file, we just want to do console.log. I want to log the data which is there once I read this particular file. And again, I want to console log this particular data. So the small line of code that I have written will read the file in a synchronous manner. What do we mean by synchronous manner is, on line 3, I'll ask my file system to read the text of this particular file, text1.txt. My server will go in the background, start reading this particular file, and once the file data is available, it will move to line 4. So what I can do is I can put some debuggers over here. Always remember, reading data from a file system is a time consuming task. It is a synchronous task. So it will be taking some time in order to read this particular file, and my thread will keep on waiting until this file is not read before moving to line 4. So just I can have a debugger over here. I can run and debug. So we are on line 1. So in this session, we'll also learn how to debug the files, how to work out with the debugger. Then we'll move to line 3. Once the data is extracted from line 3, then only we move to line 4. So over here, yeah, the console. Let's move to console. Let's clear out the console first. Clear console. I'll run this particular line of code in a synchronous manner, which means this particular program will be done, or this would be read line by line. It goes to line 3, it reads a file, console outputs the file, and then only it moves to line 4. So this is a synchronous way. Although the delay in reading this particular file is very small because I'm referring to my local system itself, but in a real-time system, if you're just trying to read a file from some remote server, it can take seconds. So you basically keep waiting for at least, let's say, 1 second on line number 3, and then you proceed towards the next request to read the line or to read a file from a particular server. Only when line 3 has been catered, then you move to line 4. 3 can have some delays, then you go to 4. 4 also have some delays, then you go further. So this is a synchronous way how you do in ASP.NET. So I have added a sync keyword over here. So had it been a asynchronous programming, the code would have been different. I would have said fs dot, again I want to read file. What is the file name that I want to read? The file name is again text1. I'll say text1.txt. I'll raise a request to read this particular file, and I'll say once the data is available, I have a function or a callback that has to execute. This callback takes an error as an input and some file data that you have. So once the data is available, what you have to do is console.log the data that is available from the file. So this is the first request that you have to do. And similarly, I have to read data from text2. So in the previous way, what we saw was you move from line 3 to line 4 only when this file has been read. Now let's just execute this line of code and see the difference. What I'll do is I'll rerun this. I'll have some debuggers over here on these points. I'll run and debug. What would happen is it goes to line 3. It sees that there is some time consuming task or an asynchronous task. He says, I'll dedicate this task to someone in the background. Meanwhile, I'll just move forward on line 7. You can see this console.log data has not been executed because this is time consuming. Meanwhile, you are dedicating the other asynchronous task to other thread. Then once the first thread is done with reading the text file 1, it may go inside this. It extracts the data, console logs it. Meanwhile, the thread 2 is still working on reading the data from text2.txt. Once he's done with the programming, you may go and console log that data as well, and the program is done. So here you see we are not working in a synchronous manner, we are working in an asynchronous manner, wherein every time when there is a a time consuming task or a time consuming query, you move further, you cater to the synchronous part of your application, and then the asynchronous part is getting done, is getting executed in the background. So this
Uh,
is a small difference that we have inside a asynchronous programming versus a synchronous programming. Yeah.
we have a situation where the second file is read before the first file.
Yeah, we do. In certain cases, we can have those situations.
But if I don't want that situation to happen, so I should always handle the second file in a, like I should always handle the first file in a synchronous process and the second file in a asynchronous process.
Maybe, let's say you have another scenario where you have 3 files. Okay,
Okay.
you can have this.
Yeah.
Now, again, we are working with multiple asynchronous requests. Agree? You want your file, text file 2 to be only read once text file 1 has been read. Okay. So what you can do is you can put this fs.read file text2 inside a callback function of text file, the first one that we have on line 3. So you'll say once the text 1 has been read, at that moment of time, go and read text 2. Meanwhile, if you have any other asynchronous work, you can also do that particular stuff on the background thread, simultaneously. I mean, if you have to read 3 files and then you have a dependency, you have a file 2 dependency on file 1, but file 3 is independent. You can have this sort of execution model wherein you are making file 2 dependent on file 1, but file 3 is still working in isolation. You are making multiple asynchronous requests or multiple asynchronous tasks work in a parallel rather than a synchronous way.
Okay.
And these model works good when you are working with application that has to fetch data to you. So LinkedIn, when you are making a request to get a LinkedIn profile, you have multiple data that is required. As I said, you might require data about your profile, your connections, and all those things could be saved in different servers. And these all requests are independent. So maybe you can use this model in order to fetch all the data asynchronously, and you'll end up reducing the amount of time that has been taken in order to fetch your application end to end. So yeah,
So
I
the
mean, as a part
function,
of, sorry.
okay, so the function, like over the method, what you have written, function error and data. So that is not something a predefined method. Like we can write functions on our, like we can just create on our own functions. Like instead of error and data, can I use any other parameters over there? Or
See,
that
you can
can.
write X and Y as well, but like over here, you can write X and Y. If you're talking about variable names, then you can
Mhm.
change it. But let's say this file system, so fs.read file has got a predefined way. So what happens is when you write fs.read file, so this is trying to get data in an asynchronous manner. So it has a callback function associated. So JavaScript works on callback. Once we discuss more about what is asynchronous calls, what are callback, we'll be able to understand this. But yeah, JavaScript works on the callback, which means once the file has been read, first look for whether that file reading has got some error or not. If not, you'll get the data. So the first parameter will give you a value in case of error, and in case you don't have any error, it will give you a null value for error and the file content in data.
So that is a predefined way. You have to follow a syntactical approach. File read function gives you as a first parameter some error and the second parameter as data. So that is again implicit. You have to work out if you're working with fs.read file, this is the way it would work. It will expect a error as a first parameter of a callback, and then the second parameter is the actual data.
Okay.
So yep, again, I didn't explain you the background, a lot of background theory behind this, how it works, what are events. Again, just from a sake of demo point of view, that is something that I had to show you. And any questions you have, anything that you have further about it, we can discuss. So we have many similar function. This is how you'll make asynchronous data calls, database calls, and all those stuff. So whenever you are making database calls, you want them to be asynchronous. Node.js will help you create a asynchronous database calls as well. So we are basically moving from a synchronous way of programming in ASP.NET to a asynchronous way of programming. That's the only difference that we have to learn. Making a database calls asynchronously, getting file system data asynchronously, extracting data about a operating system. So even if you make a query about your operating system, like what is the kind of Windows that you are having, what is the operating system, what is the memory, they are also asynchronous. They involve some extra time, that has some extra latency that is involved over there in order to go to your operating system, get the data about it. I don't want my main thread to wait for that amount of time while the data is getting fetched. I just want to move on. I would just want to see what all asynchronous tasks or what all time consuming tasks are there, and I want to keep executing them without waiting for any one to come up with data. So that's the way Node.js works. So here we saw 3 file. We are just trying to extract files, but we don't want to wait until the file is available. We want to keep proceeding further. And that makes a node a very different language from any other language in the market. So we have a asynchronous capability, and over here you are not creating any thread by yourself in order to get this work done asynchronously. Node.js is itself taking care of what has to be done and how it has to be executed. So the user is not, making a lot of code in order to make things work asynchronously. Had it been ASP.NET or Java, you have to write code by yourself in order to cater multiple requests at a single moment of time.
So in Node.js also, can we have like MVC architecture, like way of handling things in a controller service, so and
Yeah.
a view perspective. So can we have a similar architecture in Node.js also?
Yeah, so it's all up to you. You can segregate your application out in a business logic. So you can have a controller, you can have a view layer, and as well as you can have how you want to route your application. So yeah, similar model can be deployed over here in Node.js. So again, right now what we are doing is we are just catering. I'm just writing a very simple program which is fetching data from 3 files and displaying. Going further, the things are not that simple. Let's say you want to fetch some data. You have to first accept the request. You have to determine what kind of request it is. You have to make some business logic decisions, and then you proceed further. So yeah, then in Node.js as well, you can just break your application down into multiple layers. That is just to explain you how asynchronous applications work and what's the difference between what we work traditionally versus what we have in this technology. And that programming style we have to learn throughout the session. Along with that, once we'll be working with APIs, we have to learn how to make the routing work. So there's a framework called Express that we'll be learning. For database, we'll be learning in MongoDB. For UI, we'll be learning a small technology called WASH or EJBs. So we have to learn about what is the WASH framework, what is the EJB framework, how to create UIs with WASH or EJBs, how to extract data, how to use that data in the rendering library, and how to make everything work in an asynchronous manner. So yeah, that's it from the demo perspective. If you have any questions, any thought process around it, we can discuss.
So in Node.js, do we have a similar concepts like what we had in OOPS, inheritance, abstraction, encapsulation? So can we have those concepts over here, like
So,
interfaces and all those things? What we do in a traditional C sharp programming or Java programming?
so what you are talking about is not a capability of Node.js. It's like whether do we have a capability, these capabilities in Java or not. Oh, sorry, what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm working with different technologies. So I'm saying this particular capability, we have to explore whether we can create a inheritance sort of structure in JavaScript or not. Maybe if you want to work with the concept of interfaces or the concept of inheritance and all those stuff, what we can do is we can try to create a node application in TypeScript. JavaScript natively do not have interfaces. It has inheritance, but there's something called object chaining rather than object inheritance. So again, you are coming from ASP.NET background, which is object oriented language, to a language which is JavaScript, which is not a object oriented language. So JavaScript is functional language, and you are coming from an object oriented language into a functional paradigm. Yes, you can make interfaces work, but in the background, we have nothing called object oriented language in JavaScript. Even we don't have object inheritance, we have something called object chaining in JavaScript. But yeah, you have similar syntax if you work with TypeScript. So it's up to you whether you want to follow a functional paradigm or a TypeScript paradigm. But yeah, we'll be talking about how JavaScript works, what are the inheritance model, how can you have a data hiding, inheritance, encapsulation using JavaScript when we'll talk about ES6 features and the JavaScript part.
Okay.
Yeah. So anything further? Were you comfortable with the session? Was that informative?
Mayank, also for further the testing, right? So do we require different packages to in sync with this TypeScript or JavaScript?
Sorry, can you just repeat?
No, for the test-driven approach, right? Do we require a different package along with this whatever we called the TypeScript or the JavaScript in whatever the programming language we write? Do we need to have the package along with this code? So no, do you know about the Jest? We heard about Jest and what is Mocha and everything, right?
So there's something called Jest, Mocha, Chai. All those
Yeah.
frameworks are the testing frameworks. So if we are working with the testing part, we have to learn those frameworks. We have to see how those frameworks can help us create test cases.
Okay. Um, like that.
So
That is also in JavaScript, or whether we need to have in that TypeScript.
see, again, when you talk about multiple, technologies or multiple libraries, most of them JavaScript being a, you know, um, again, JavaScript being a functional programming, not everything is available in TypeScript. They have their own syntaxes. They have these libraries have their own way to work out. So it's not that we'll be having either TypeScript or JavaScript over there. When we'll talk about Jest and all those, testing frameworks, they have their own way to work out. They have their own syntactical stuff. So yeah, JavaScript is definitely over there, but TypeScript is not everywhere because not all libraries use TypeScript as a background language. TypeScript is just to make ASP.NET and Java developers feel more comfortable, nothing more. If you have worked with languages like React, which are purely functional, so their focus is to learn JavaScript just like what it is, which is a functional programming, less focus on object oriented concepts and all those paradigm.
Okay.
I mean, again, that's what I'm saying. If you have a specific requirement that you want to have everything in TypeScript, if you want to learn Node.js with TypeScript, then we can try following that path. But Node.js as a traditional developer, if someone is working on Node.js, not much people would work out on TypeScript on Node.js. So
Oh,
again,
oh.
you might be working on some product in your company. If it is a TypeScript product on Node, then we can probably look for TypeScript approach. Else, JavaScript is great for Node.js. So that's what you're working on. You're working on a functional language which do not have a concept of, you know, of this entire inheritance and interfaces. So if you're working on such a language, be more native to all those concepts rather than trying out something which is more comfortable in terms of the syntactical, so which makes you feel like you're working on Java or .NET.
Okay.
So my focus would be make you understand how functional programming works. What is the so you have multiple concepts in JavaScript as well. Function chaining. So function chaining is how object inheritance has been attained. So again, that's what I said. You have to come out from a thought process of object oriented language and understand how JavaScript works and get the work done. How JavaScript actually executes, what happened in the background. That is all things that you have to learn.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
So yep, in case you have any more queries, I think you can call me back if you're comfortable. With this particular session, it's just an overview. We'll be talking lot about how JavaScript works. So we'll be spending couple of hours, I would say around 3 to 4 hours, understanding how JavaScript works in the background. I'll give you a completely fresh overview. I'll try to unlearn the object-oriented language and start with the functional language, and I'll just explain you the entire infra even before starting Node.js. So yep, I think if you like the session, we can continue. If you have any questions, you can post them back to Sampath or he'll get back to me and I can answer them as well. If you have a specific requirement, you can just tell me and I can cater that as well.
Let you know, Mayank, if we will discuss about like there are some of the features which our company is using specifically like TypeScript. In some of our projects, we use TypeScript and Node.js together. And as Priya has
Okay.
said, there are like some testing frameworks.
Like
Um,
Jest and Chai.
um, I'm not sure which framework they are using because I have not yet started any Node.js project. Um, So maybe I'll have to touch base with Priya, like what frameworks are using in testing.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. And other thing, like, can you cover lambdas, like how you write lambda functions in Node.js? Will that come under the scope of the course?
Lambda is in the Lambda that you have in ASP.NET?
No, lambdas in Node.js.
Okay. So yeah, let me see. So Lambda, I think higher order functions are you talking about? Let me just see what you mean by this particular Lambdas in Node.js. Mm, I think by Lambda you mean to see higher, or you mean to say higher order functions in JavaScript. Maybe. Yeah, I can look into it and I can just respond back. Lambda is not a native term to Node.js. Maybe some library might be having, might be added. AWS. I'll get back to this here.
Yeah, we really don't want to learn like how it is involved with not much into AWS, but at least how we write a lambda functions. I know it's basically a serverless function, so
Okay, okay,
how do
yeah.
you write it
You are
in Node?
referring to Lambda of AWS, is it?
Yeah, but we
Yeah,
write it in Node.js, and I think
yeah.
the call is
So
to
the
cloud.
Lambda could be written in any language. You can write in Java, you can write in other languages, you can write in Python. Node.js is one of the preferred language. Definitely we can get into details of how we can write Lambda in AWS. Yeah, that could be definitely covered. Yeah.
Okay.
So yep, I think you can post your queries back to Sampath. I need to rush to my office right now, and if required, we can have another session, small session for your queries, and then probably you can decide what you want to go forward with, what approaches, whether you want to go forward or not. All those questions we can just talk about later in the session. Um, right now, let's just end up this particular session, and then probably if you require more